freed from the ordinary rules of waking thought. And some researchers now believe this loosened dream state processing may be central to the brain's ability to form flexible connections between experiences. Dreaming may help the mind explore emotional and conceptual relationships that waking consciousness would normally suppress. The dreaming brain experiments, associates, imagines, connects distant pieces of experience into something larger. And perhaps this is why dreams sometimes feel emotionally true, even when they are logically impossible. The brain may be processing meaning more than literal reality, trying to emotionally organize life in symbolic ways, trying to integrate experience into a form the nervous system can carry forward. Researchers also increasingly believe that sleep stabilizes internal models of the world itself, not only memories, but the unconscious frameworks through which human beings predict reality. How relationships work, how danger works, how safety works, how life tends to unfold. These internal models are updated gradually across waking experience, but sleep appears essential for consolidating them into usable intuition, which means understanding often finishes forming during the night. The brain keeps processing patterns long after conscious thought stops trying. And because the sleeping brain is designed to generalize patterns, it occasionally produces distortion too. False memories, subtle inaccuracies, details that feel true because they fit emotionally or conceptually with existing experience. This is not necessarily malfunction. It is part of the same adaptive system that allows the brain to infer broader meaning from incomplete information. The brain predicts, connects, generalizes, sometimes beyond literal accuracy. And perhaps emotionally, human beings do this constantly. People build narratives about themselves, about relationships, about safety, about what to expect from life. The nervous system extracts patterns from repeated experience and turns them into expectation, sometimes wisely, sometimes painfully. Which means healing may partly involve helping the brain experience enough new patterns for those expectations to slowly change. Enough safety, enough calm, enough restorative sleep, enough moments where the nervous system realizes not every future must resemble the past. And perhaps this is the deepest realization emerging from decades of sleep science. Sleep and learning are not separate processes at all. They are intertwined continuously. What you experience during the day shapes how the brain sleeps at night. How you sleep at night shapes how you experience the next day. Learning changes sleep. Sleep changes learning. Emotion changes sleep. Sleep changes emotion. The human mind exists in cycles. not fixed states. And maybe this is why no difficult season of life remains entirely permanent, because the nervous system is always changing, always adapting, always reorganizing itself in response to experience. The sleeper and the learner are not separate versions of you. They are one living process, cycling endlessly between experience and restoration, between effort and repair, between consciousness and the deep hidden intelligence that continues working long after your eyes close. And perhaps tonight, somewhere beneath awareness, your own brain is still trying to carry you gently toward healing too. The more scientists study sleep, the more artificial the separation between waking and sleeping begins to seem. The effort of the day and the restoration of the night are not isolated events. They are parts of one continuous process. The brain that absorbs experience while awake and the brain that reorganizes experience during sleep are not separate systems taking turns. They are one living intelligence cycling between different modes of operation. Learning begins during the day, but much of its deepest transformation happens in darkness, quietly, beyond awareness. And perhaps emotional healing follows the same rhythm. People often assume healing only happens during active effort, during therapy, reflection, conversation, conscious insight. But the nervous system continues processing life long after conscious thought grows quiet. The night keeps working, even now, even while you rest. And perhaps you can already feel your body softening slightly as you listen, breathing slower, muscles heavier, thoughts drifting more loosely than before. Your nervous system moving through its own ancient cycles. Activation, release, stillness, repair, again and again, like breathing itself. Inhale, exhale, effort, restoration. The body understands rhythm instinctively, and maybe this is why sleep feels less like shutting down and more like returning to something deeply natural, a state the human brain has trusted for millions of years. You do not have to hold everything together perfectly through the night. The nervous system keeps working even after you stop trying, and sleep does not interrupt the story of your life. It continues it. The neurons activated during the day continue firing in patterns throughout the night. Experiences replay, emotions reorganize, connections strengthen. The unfinished work of the day quietly carries forward into sleep. A child struggling to ride a bicycle one evening, then suddenly succeeding the next morning, has already experienced this hidden process directly. The skill was not fully completed during practice itself. The brain continued refining it afterward, in darkness, without effort, without awareness. And perhaps adults experience versions of this constantly. An emotional realization arriving after sleep, a difficult conversation feeling different in the morning, a burden becoming slightly lighter overnight. The nervous system continues integrating experience beneath consciousness. Morning is often not the beginning of change. Only the moment change becomes noticeable. Deep inside the brain, the hippocampus quietly replays fragments of waking life throughout the night. Not every detail, not every moment equally. The brain selects, prioritizes, compresses experience into patterns that matter most. Certain moments stabilize more deeply, others gradually loosen and fade. Every morning, people wake having unconsciously released parts of the day behind them and carried other parts forward more permanently into themselves. The sleeping brain is constantly deciding what becomes part of you. And perhaps there is something profoundly compassionate about this process. Because the brain does not require perfection before it begins helping you. You do not need to fully solve every problem before sleep. You do not need complete clarity, complete healing, complete certainty. The nervous system keeps working with whatever you manage to carry into the night. Even unfinished effort matters. Even partial understanding matters. Even exhausted attempts matter. The sleeping brain continues where conscious effort leaves off, quietly helping complete what waking life could not fully finish alone. And maybe this is why there is something deeply comforting about surrendering to sleep. Not because you are abandoning responsibility, but because another layer of intelligence begins taking over for a while. A slower intelligence, an older intelligence, one that understands rhythm better than urgency. And perhaps this changes the meaning of sleep entirely. Sleep is not simply time off from learning, healing, or growth. It may be one of the primary ways those things happen at all. Studying opens a question. Sleep begins shaping the answer. Experience creates activation. Sleep creates integration. Effort initiates change. Sleep stabilizes it. Neither phase is complete without the other. And perhaps this is also true emotionally. People often believe they must consciously force healing every moment. But the nervous system heals partly through cycles, through periods of letting go, through biological processes that continue unfolding beneath awareness. The brain asks for participation, not perfection. And deep inside lighter stages of sleep, tiny bursts of neural activity continue appearing throughout the night. Sleep spindles, brief rhythmic pulses moving across the brain like delicate electrical waves. Researchers sometimes describe them as part of the brain's internal timing system, helping coordinate communication between temporary memory storage and longer-term neural networks. With each subtle rhythm, new experiences are gradually transferred into more stable forms, almost like the sleeping brain carefully carrying fragile pieces of life into safer keeping. Pulse by pulse, cycle by cycle, night after night. And perhaps your own nervous system is doing something similar right now, sorting through the emotional weight of recent days, trying to determine what must be carried forward and what can finally begin softening into rest. You will never consciously feel most of what your brain is doing tonight. You will not sense the electrical rhythms moving across neural networks. You will not notice memories transferring quietly from fragile temporary storage into deeper, more stable forms. You will not hear the tiny bursts of communication between brain regions coordinating emotion, memory, and meaning. And yet all of it is happening right now, quietly, faithfully. The most vivid dreams, the ones that linger softly at the edge of morning, may be moments when emotional and memory systems are working especially intensely together. The hippocampus replaying fragments of experience, the amygdala attaching emotional significance, the dreaming brain trying to weave separate pieces into something coherent enough to carry forward, not replaying life exactly as it happened, but extracting something deeper from it, a pattern, a realization, an emotional truth too subtle to fully form during waking hours alone. And perhaps this is why dreams sometimes feel emotionally meaningful, even when they make little logical sense. The brain may be organizing feeling more than narrative, trying to understand the emotional shape of life itself. And maybe there is something quietly brave about sleep, because every night asks human beings to stop striving for a little while, to loosen control, to release the belief that staying awake longer, pushing harder, thinking more intensely will finally resolve everything. But the nervous system often heals differently than the conscious mind expects. The brain seems to understand something modern culture often forgets. Constant effort is not the same as true progress. Some forms of growth only happen after surrender, after stillness, after the mind finally stops forcing itself forward. And perhaps this matters especially for people carrying chronic stress. So many exhausted individuals feel trapped in the pressure to keep up, keep improving, keep solving, keep carrying, as though resting means falling behind. But neuroscience offers a gentler perspective. The brain does not stop progressing when you sleep. Many of its most essential processes begin there. The hours surrendered to rest are not lost hours. They are often the hours where integration quietly happens. And the strange thing is, you rarely feel this process directly. Memory consolidation is silent. You do not feel the moment understanding deepens. You do not notice when emotional intensity softens slightly overnight. You do not sense neural pathways stabilizing beneath awareness. The work happens below the threshold of conscious sensation, but over time, the effects become visible. Something once confusing becomes familiar. Something once emotionally overwhelming becomes survivable. Something once difficult becomes automatic. Every night, the brain quietly transforms fragments into structure. And perhaps this is why healing can feel invisible while it is happening. The nervous system changes gradually enough that people often believe nothing is improving, until one day they notice they are reacting differently than before. Softer, calmer, less trapped inside the same emotional loops. Not because a miracle occurred suddenly, but because the brain had been working silently for many nights in a row. The sleeping brain is not inactive. It is differently engaged. The same networks that absorbed experience during the day continue processing experience throughout the night, reviewing, selecting, connecting, compressing, strengthening, reorganizing. And even now, as you listen, your own brain is still learning, still adapting, still trying to make sense of your life in ways conscious thought alone cannot fully achieve. There is something profoundly gentle about how the sleeping brain works. It does not force change violently. It does not rush healing. It works slowly, patiently, like water reshaping stone over long periods of time. Tiny adjustments, repeated cycles, subtle reorganizations accumulating across many nights. And perhaps this is one reason emotionally exhausted people often underestimate the importance of rest. Healing rarely feels dramatic while it unfolds, but biology does not require dramatic moments to create profound change. The nervous system simply keeps responding to repeated conditions over time. Safety, stillness, recovery, again and again. What feels unresolved tonight may already be softening slightly beneath awareness. What feels emotionally tangled now may become clearer after enough nights of processing. The brain does not ask you to force completion before sleep arrives. It simply continues the work for a while after you let go. And the work does not finish in one night alone. Memory itself unfolds gradually across many cycles of sleep. What stabilizes tonight may deepen further tomorrow night. And the night after that, the brain keeps refining, keeps strengthening, keep integrating. Human understanding is not built in single moments. It accumulates rhythmically across time. And perhaps emotional resilience develops the same way. No single night heals everything. But many nights of genuine restoration can slowly reshape how the nervous system carries life, which means you are not only the result of today's experiences, you are also the result of countless nights your brain spent quietly reorganizing those experiences into the person you became. Every morning contains traces of every previous night, and during deep sleep, slow oscillations move across the cortex in long, rhythmic waves. Researchers sometimes compare them to tides, electrical currents rising and falling across enormous neural landscapes, the sleeping brain breathing in patterns older than conscious thought itself. And perhaps there is something comforting in imagining this hidden rhythm continuing tonight too. Your brain moving through its ancient cycles, restoring, sorting, softening, preparing you gently for another morning you do not yet need to think about. Only this breath, this darkness, this moment of letting the nervous system finally rest inside something larger than effort alone. As these slow rhythms move through the sleeping brain, something extraordinary is happening beneath awareness. Connections strengthen, others loosen gently and fade. Tiny networks of neurons reorganize themselves according to what the day suggested mattered most. The brain is continuously reshaping itself, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, patiently, one night at a time. And perhaps there is something deeply relieving about realizing this process cannot be forced through sheer effort alone. No amount of staying awake longer, no amount of overthinking, no amount of pushing beyond exhaustion can replace what deep restorative sleep accomplishes biologically. There are molecular processes that only occur fully during sleep, neural rhythms that cannot be replicated through willpower, restorative cycles that begin only after conscious striving softens. And maybe this is not a limitation to resent. Maybe it is permission to stop carrying the impossible belief that constant effort alone can heal, solve, or complete everything. The nervous system was never designed to survive permanently in forcing mode. Some forms of transformation only happen after letting go. A child learning to read experiences this. An athlete mastering movement, a musician practicing difficult passages, an adult struggling through the early confusion of a new language. Again and again, progress appears mysteriously after sleep. Something awkward becomes fluid. Something difficult becomes natural. Not because more conscious effort happened overnight, but because the sleeping brain continued working in silence. Sleep becomes the invisible teacher, finishing lessons the waking mind could only begin. And perhaps emotional growth unfolds in exactly the same way. A conversation that once felt painful becomes easier to hold emotionally. A fear slowly loses sharpness. A nervous system that once expected danger begins relaxing slightly in safe environments. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. Through repetition, through recovery, through many nights of quiet neural revision. And the brain does not sharply separate intellectual learning from emotional learning. To the nervous system, both matter. The fact you consciously studied and the emotional atmosphere you absorbed unconsciously pass through overlapping systems of overnight consolidation. The brain stores information, but it also stores feeling, tone, emotional expectation, the sense of whether the world feels safe or threatening. What you learn and who you become are deeply interconnected processes, and sleep sits at the center of both, which means every night of your life has already shaped you far more than you probably realize. Every word you recognize, every face you remember, every skill that now feels automatic, every emotional pattern you carry, all of it passed repeatedly through the sleeping brain. You are not only the product of waking effort, you are also the product of thousands of nights of neural integration. Thousands of nights where your brain quietly decided what would remain part of you, and tonight becomes another layer added to that lifelong process, which perhaps softens one of the deepest anxieties modern people carry, the fear of falling behind. So many exhausted individuals secretly believe rest is dangerous, that if they stop pushing, the world will move ahead without them. But sleep science suggests something almost opposite. The brain does not fall behind during sleep. It catches up, integrates, transforms scattered experience into something usable and enduring. The nervous system needs periods where incoming stimulation finally slows enough for deeper organization to occur. And perhaps this changes the emotional meaning of rest entirely. Rest is not abandoning progress. It is part of how progress becomes biologically possible. The brain under chronic exhaustion may continue functioning temporarily, but often without fully integrating what life keeps demanding from it. Experiences accumulate faster than they can be processed. Stress compounds. Emotion remains unresolved. The river keeps moving too quickly for clarity to settle, and memory itself is less like a photograph than people once imagined. It is more like a living river, always shifting, always being reshaped by new experiences flowing into it. Sleep is where the current slows enough for meaning to settle beneath the surface, where emotional turbulence gradually softens, where scattered fragments begin organizing into something coherent. What you remember tomorrow will not be exactly what you experience today. It will be today transformed by the night that followed. And perhaps this has been the quiet truth running beneath everything science has discovered about sleep. Consolidation is not a small secondary detail added onto learning. It is the completion of learning itself. Without consolidation, experience remains fragile, temporary, disconnected. The sleeping brain turns experience into structure, understanding, identity. And maybe this means something profoundly hopeful for people carrying exhaustion, anxiety, or emotional overwhelm tonight. Because even when conscious effort feels incomplete, even when healing feels unfinished, the nervous system continues working gently in the background, still adapting, still reorganizing, still trying to move your life toward coherence, one night at a time. You do not have to force every part of that process alone. Some of the most important work your brain will ever do happens only after you finally allow yourself to rest. Everything you experience today, everything you practiced, everything you tried to understand, became raw material for the sleeping brain. The effort itself was only the beginning. Sleep is where that effort becomes something lasting, something stable enough to carry into tomorrow. And perhaps this changes the way we think about the dark entirely, because lying awake in bed can sometimes feel unproductive in a world obsessed with visible achievement. But beneath consciousness, the brain is already doing exactly what it evolved to do. Not the urgent striving of daytime life, not constant performance. Something older, slower, more patient. A process that existed long before deadlines, schedules, or modern pressure taught people to distrust rest. The human brain learned in darkness long before human beings fully understood what learning even was. And perhaps tonight, your own nervous system remembers that ancient rhythm better than your conscious mind does. The brain does not require constant vigilance to continue adapting. Some forms of understanding arrive only after effort softens, only after the mind stops reaching so desperately for control. And maybe this is one of the deepest emotional truths hidden inside sleep science. You are more than what you consciously accomplish while awake. The nervous system keeps growing, integrating, healing, learning, even during moments when you appear to be doing nothing at all. Perhaps especially then, the quiet work of sleep is not a reward given after productivity. It is part of life itself, part of being human. And now, our journey through the sleeping brain begins gently coming to rest. We've moved from the first fragile moments when memories form, through the slow oscillations that stabilize experience during deep sleep, through the dreaming mind connecting emotion, creativity, and meaning in darkness. And again, the same truth kept returning. The brain's most essential work often happens without conscious effort. A new idea first appears fragile, uncertain, incomplete. Then somewhere during the night, neural pathways strengthen quietly beneath awareness. Connections deepen, patterns emerge, and by morning, something once unfamiliar suddenly feels known. Not because you forced understanding into existence, but because the brain continued shaping it patiently while you rested. Sleep learning reminds us of something modern life rarely allows people to feel. Understanding does not always need to be seized aggressively. Sometimes it must be allowed. The nervous system often works best when it no longer feels hunted by urgency. Some of the most meaningful processing in human life happens in silence, in darkness, in the long, patient hours between one emotionally overwhelming day and the next morning's softer perspective. And perhaps the brain reveals a kind of patience human beings rarely extend toward themselves. The brain does not demand immediate mastery, immediate healing, immediate clarity. It works gradually, compassionately, cycle by cycle, night by night. And maybe right now, you can take one deeper breath than before, a slower breath, the kind that tells the nervous system it is safe enough to loosen slightly. Notice the weight of your body resting beneath you, the quiet movement of air entering and leaving your lungs, the strange miracle that your heart continues beating faithfully without needing your attention, your entire body carrying out invisible acts of intelligence every second. And perhaps there is comfort in remembering that you are not separate from the larger rhythms of life around you. Every living thing moves through cycles, tides, seasons, breathing, sleeping, waking, effort and restoration, expansion and return. The nervous system belongs to those rhythms too. You are not failing because you need rest. You are participating in biology exactly as human beings always have. And somewhere in the vastness of the night, countless other minds are resting too. Other exhausted people trying to soften their thoughts enough to sleep. Other nervous systems slowly unwinding after difficult days. Other hearts quietly hoping for peace. You are not alone in that. Not tonight. And perhaps now, you no longer need to hold on to every idea from this journey. The brain will keep what it needs. That is what it has always done. Thoughts can begin drifting farther apart now. Slower, softer, like distant lights fading gently across dark water. Let your breathing deepen naturally. Let your muscles grow heavier, as though the night itself were carefully lowering the weight of the world from your shoulders for a little while. And if sleep comes, let it come without resistance, like a slow current carrying you somewhere quieter than thought, somewhere beneath striving, beneath urgency, into the deep biological stillness where healing continues silently on its own. And if your eyes remain open a little longer, that is okay too. Rest does not begin only after perfect sleep arrives. The nervous system has already started softening, already started shifting, already started trying to restore balance. Tomorrow morning, the brain will continue consolidating what tonight began. The slow oscillations will have moved through the cortex. Memories will have been reorganized, emotions recalibrated, tiny invisible repairs completed beneath awareness. But for now, this moment belongs only to stillness, to quiet, to allowing the mind to loosen its grip for a little while. Rest well, tired mind, and remember, the brain that learns while awake and the brain that learns while asleep have always been one continuous intelligence, patiently carrying you through the darkness toward another morning. One breath, one dream, one night at a time. Good night.